My name is Pilar Thomas. I'm a member of the Pasquayaqui tribe from Tucson, Arizona. We're Pueblo people too, so it's always nice to be back in New Mexico. I'm a proud graduate of UNM School of Law and in honor of working with Miami and the group, Senator Stefanik's, nice to see you in person, Senator, on this bill. But today, Miami's asked me just to kind of put in context not just solar community development opportunities, but other things that, of course, we have to think about when we're developing this beyond not just this Community Solar Act, but other potential market opportunities, legal issues and concerns, and other regulatory components of this. So I'm going to see if I can get this right. So we've already heard about why you do them. I'm going to organize that a little bit differently and without the pictures, because I'm a lawyer and we don't do that. But also talk a little bit about some tribal models, and we'll hear about some of these tomorrow. But there's lots of tribes around the country that are doing community solar-like projects that can serve as models for us and for the tribes and pueblos as we're looking at what we can do. The act itself gives us a lot of flexibility. We're not bound under the Community Solar Act to some of the limitations that other community solar projects will have. So that gives us some room for creativity and innovation as we're designing projects that fit what our communities need and what we may need from a tribal government or a tribal enterprise perspective. I've got to do some of the legal stuff, so I'm going to talk about some legal and regulatory considerations that we still have to contend with, even though we've got a very favorable state law that will help us with these developments. And just some things to think about from a market and technology standpoint. So why do it? So I've kind of grouped it a little bit differently. Energy sovereignty, control of your energy supply. You know, the ETA in New Mexico, I think, is a 50% renewable requirement. So if a pueblo or a tribe wanted to be 100%, obviously energy sovereignty gives you the ability to do something like that. Diversify your energy supply, control where you get your energy from, and control your energy costs. Economic development. I would also add to that list that if you've got sustainable business opportunities, remember corporations, you got Facebook right down the street who demanded 100% renewable power as a condition to move here. And they got it, right? PNM said, okay, we'll find you 100% renewable power somewhere, even though that was not a statutory or regulatory requirement. So to the extent taking control of your energy is a way to attract businesses to the Pueblo who are looking for 100% renewable. The state's only going to require 50. And as we all know, once they hit 50, that's where the utilities stop. So you have some opportunities to actually develop more economic and a competitive advantage. And then you heard about climate adaptation. You know, if you paid attention to what happens in California, where wildfires result in massive transmission lines getting shut down, and all those beautiful solar and wind projects in the desert don't actually see the electrons flow to where the load is because they've shut off transmission lines because of wildfire. Or we saw what happened in Texas. Community solar really starts to become, because of where it sits, an energy reliability and an energy resilience solution as well. I have a slightly different picture, and I just like to show this because that centralized generating plant that's out there that looks like a coal plant, but could be a natural gas plant, could be a big solar plant, right? Could be a big, massive 300 megawatt solar project in the middle of the desert, as it is in California, all up and down California desert, Nevada desert. And then the bulk transmission system, which is what gets shut off when the wildfires arise in California, or when it gets too cold, as we've seen in Texas. So community solar sits where those solar panels are at the top. And so that allows, of course, provides us with the resiliency of having power produced where it's being used and not having wait for those electrons to come in from the faraway desert. So I'm not going to diss too much on utility scale. I know Hickory Apache, for example, has got a pretty big utility scale project they're doing where they're selling that power in here to Albuquerque. Huge opportunities there, but community solar represents a different value proposition for us. I would point you to some recent work done by George Washington University on some of the challenges that governments have with trying to promote community solar for low income or moderate income communities. And this is a great little handbook. It's not long. It's about 50 pages long, which is not long for me. But it's identified some additional models for how to develop these kinds of projects in some circumstances that we might be in. So, so I would encourage you, if you're trying to look at that, to study up on it and see what some of these opportunities are. On the tribal government side, you heard about Picaris with their 1 megawatt. When I was at DOE, we were more than happy to give them $1 million to build that project. We'd love to see more and more and more of these. In California, Saboba, Rincon, and Ramona Band, they've all done kind of community scale projects that aren't subscription, but are net metered, virtual net metered. So much like Picaris, where I got a megawatt, you're going to offset all my other power costs with what this 1 megawatt produces without going through kind of this subscription model. And that's one of the benefits of the flexibility of the Community Solar Act, is you can actually structure your community solar projects a little bit differently. And then Blue Lake Rancheria, I always throw them up here. They're the only tribe with actual operating microgrids, 2 of them, that they consider community solar. They have about 1 megawatt of solar now as part of their microgrid. On the regulatory side, even though we know we've got the Community Solar Act on the state side, there's still some maybe federal legal issues we have to contend with. You heard about third-party ownership models. For those of you who have dealt with third parties coming in onto the Pueblo lands or tribal lands, we know we've got federal law that controls our ability to lease those lands. So we can't ignore that we still have Indian land laws that we might have to contend with, leasing laws, right-of-way acts, depending on how they've structured this. And there's a bit of a fight in FERC right now as to whether these projects are wholesale power projects and therefore subject to FERC jurisdiction. So we can't ignore that we might have to deal with the Federal Power Act or the Public Utility Regulatory Policy Act. And then we might have to deal with environmental laws, NEPA, National Historic Preservation Act. We might have Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act issues. So, so it's not going to be as easy as we would like it to be. We can solve that with Hearth Act. How many people have Hearth Act leasing regulations? How many Pueblos or tribes? None? Okay, that's the first thing you do. Go get your Hearth Act leasing regulations so you don't have to go to the BIA and you have some flexibility. Of course, the tribe has its own jurisdiction. You can decide for yourself what you want to do. And then on the state side, so the Community Solar Act is part of the state regulatory scheme. The rules will be set by the state's Public Utility Commission. And you'll hear from the commissioner next, one of the commissioners next on that. But in addition, within that act is one of the components is the rate setting and tariffs, the bill crediting rate that will give you the credit against that solar project. Well, that will reduce your costs, right? That's the idea, is that bill crediting rate helps you reduce your costs. But behind the meter, net metering, virtual metering, aggregate net metering, all of those aspects of offsetting costs are also set at the state level. Community solar is driven at the state level. You heard about the interconnection standards. Those are all set by the state. So we're not going to be, unfortunately, we're still, well, fortunately or unfortunately, I guess depends on how you look at it. We are still going to have some state imprint on what we want to do. And so I would strongly, strongly encourage you, if you're interested even 1 iota in doing a community solar project under the Community Solar Act, you participate in the state jurisdiction and regulatory process that's underway right now to set the rules for implementing the Community Solar Act. I strongly encourage everybody to participate. It is unfortunately one of the things that I don't see ever. I think for the first time ever, literally yesterday, I saw a tribe in California finally submit comments in a California rulemaking on net metering and microgrids. So this is where the rubber's meeting the road, is on the state jurisdiction side. And it's very important for us to participate in these processes. Otherwise, we can't complain when we get what we don't like. So we got to participate. Okay, let me end with some market and technology trends to think about. We know about climate change, right? It's real. It's here. We got to deal with it. Lots of ways to do that. but that's driving the adaptation of and adoption of microgrids and community solar, which represents, right, generating power close to where we're using it. So I don't have to worry about massive transmission lines freezing up or heating up. Where I come from in Tucson, it's hot. Here it can be hot and cold, but it just gets hot there. Falling costs, everything's cheaper. Everything's getting cheaper, notwithstanding the supply chain problems we're going to have, which is making everything a little bit more expensive. But it's still considerably cheaper. The levelized cost of solar has plummeted. On utility scale and community solar, it is unsubsidized, which means no tax credits, still cheaper than coal right now in New Mexico because you got great sun. Local government sustainability, Albuquerque, 100% renewable. That's why they're going to Jicarilla to get some solar projects and solar power. That's a huge movement. Money is everywhere, everywhere. Hundreds of billions of dollars in just capital markets that will fund these projects. So when people say we have an access to capital problem, that is not our problem. That is not our problem. There is plenty of money. So that's the good news. We just have to want to do it. Utility business models, you hear from the utilities tomorrow, I think, right? So I'm not going to speak for them. Just know it's all changing. And so we need to be prepared for that. State regulatory design is changing. And lastly, federal policy is shifting. You heard from Wahala Johns, you heard from Catherine Issam. I think you're going to hear from Senator Heinrich. Tomorrow, I'm talking about kind of what's happening on the federal legislative side. But this 180-degree shift from the last administration to the current administration means something, right? President Biden put out a couple of big executive orders around climate change and racial and economic justice, this whole of government approach, which, what were those 9 famous words? I'm from the government and I'm here to help. Well, maybe we'll see if they can get it right for Obama's 3rd term. But having said that, environmental justice, economic equality are high on this administration's agenda. They're putting their money where their mouth is in their budget. Wahala talked about their $122 million. The House Appropriations Bill gives them $70 million. The Senate gives them $122 million. So it's going to be somewhere in between. They're going to finally get some change to work with. The Justice 40 initiative, which is also reflected in the budget. 40% of the government's investment should be going into low-income, disadvantaged, and tribal communities. We've got the infrastructure legislation that came out of the Senate. We'll see what happens. There's a pool going around. If you guys want to join our pool, we got a pool going around about when these bills are going to be passed. But between infrastructure and reconciliation, we will see some money coming out of this. And there's a huge effort, I'll talk about this again in more detail tomorrow, around access to solar and some major proposed changes that will incredibly benefit tribes. And it's small stuff. It's not the big money. It's the little stuff that will matter. And I'll give you some ideas of that. So, and then finally, we're back in the Paris Accords. So the US is going to be moving. We got COP26 coming up. And so there's a lot of momentum on the federal side to really try and do something here. I'm a little bit of a doubting Thomas, so we'll see if they can get their act together, the feds that is, anytime soon. But it's good news that that's the movement, that's the effort, and we're all sitting in a great place for that. So I've got a list of additional resources. There's the NREL thing up there, the handbook from George Washington, some other sites that have a lot of good information around community solar development. And so with that, I think, am I out of time? I got you back out of time. Perfect.